Intro. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Outside Notes. I'm Marshall. Welcome. I'm happy to have you along. We're going to be talking about, one of the most juicy topics we've gotten in Limited in a long time, companions. So there are 10 companions in Ikoria, all at the rare slot, which means that us Limited players actually will see them pretty frequently. Each of the companions offers us an interesting decision point. If we are willing to accept their sometimes heavy deck building restriction, then we get the benefit of their undying friendship and also the ability to have them effectively in our starting hand from the beginning of every game for the entirety that we get to play with this deck. So there's two fundamental things that are fighting each other. One is how restrictive is the deck building requirement and how big is the payoff? In other words, how good is the companion? If a companion has too heavy a restriction for not as great of a payoff, you'll often want to either just put it in your main deck or not even play it at all. But on the other hand, if the deck building restriction isn't that hard and the payoff is awesome, you'll want to make really sure that you meet that deck building restriction. Interestingly, overshadowing this is a much bigger factor than even the two that I've already mentioned, which is how insanely powerful it is to have access to a card basically on the same turn every game, every match that you get to play with the deck. So basically, even if the creature isn't a bomb, it's probably worth going for the deck building restriction as long as it's like in any way attainable. And many of these companions are bombs. Now, one of the big things about companion has been the talk. Oh my goodness sakes. If you've been on social media anytime since Ikoria was released, you will know that people are talking about companions and Limited. First off, notable Limited expert Ryan Sachs. Let's see what Ryan says. Finally, my first Lurrus draft deck. So this is Lurrus of the Dream Den. And nice, you can see successfully built around. Next is Ari Lax, and Ari had some big predictions. He says, probably not writing the 10 most broken cards in a Ikoria article, but the exercise of how many non-companions make the list is fun. My current guess is 2 to 3. If the top 10 cards in the set, if 7 of them or maybe even 8 of them are companions, that says a lot about how powerful it is in Limited. All right, here's Ryan Sachs again. He's got a lot to say. Trophy number 15, the deck was absurd, the games were a snooze, and this is an Obosh deck, so this is where all your cards have to have odd converted mana cost, so you see 1, 3, 5, 7, in fact 2 9s. Next we have some valuable life advice from Ben Stark. He says, how do you not draft? This has nothing to do with companions, by the way. This is just general life advice. Literally when drafting is an option at your fingertips, how do you choose to do anything else ever? Ben, I feel you, man. I'm right there with you. So Ryan has more to say about companions? I don't know why I keep seeing sentences like this. Lutri isn't a great companion in Limited because if you only run one copy of any card in your deck, it won't be consistent. But you always have Lutri in your deck? So it is in fact very consistent? Ryan, I agree. Let's see what Sam Black has to say. He's got a little something to add. The best thing about Companion is that they're strong enough to justify not drafting the red-white cycling deck sometimes. From the Darkest Mage, Michael Jacob, noted sealed expert, by the way. He loves sealeds, very good at it. 15-0 in the past 3 days streaming in sealed. I've had 4 trophies so far. All 4 had a companion. I'm sure it's unrelated. Yeah, probably is. Here's some more from Sam Black. He's talking about Kahira here. Just played my first Limited with Kahira. Opponent complained about my perfect draws both games. I wonder if that had anything to do with starting with my Lord in my hand. Looks like Ryan wasn't quite done talking about Companion here. Let's see what else. This is a great example of how good Companions are. If I showed you this deck without Companion, how well do you think it would perform? I think it would do poorly. So yes, you really should try your hardest to jump through the necessary hoops in order to have a Companion. This is a deck from Mr. Metronome from the Lords of Limited podcast. And yeah, so this is a Gyruda deck. It's kind of weird. Mr. Metronome actually had Obosh or Gyruda, but as you can see, 2, 4, and 6 mana cost cards. So that's the even costed for Gyruda here. What else do people have to... okay, Ryan has more to say. He's got so much to say He's actually just written a whole article about Companion. Look, I didn't think I'd have to write this article, but I do. There is not a single common or uncommon that is correct to take Pack One, Pick One over the Companions. And he's yelling again on Twitter somehow about people passing them. Here's an example of a draft that I did, but other cards, they jump up in value. For example, look at Springshot Trap here. I played 2 of those. That card is not normally very good, but you know what it is? It's odd mana cost and it's a source of damage. It actually does 6 damage if you have Obosh on the battlefield. Speaking of, I did find myself in a situation in a draft that I just had to show you here. This is exactly what you don't want to happen when you play an Obosh deck. So I've got Obosh on the battlefield and look at what my opponent has. Lava Brink Venturer, it says you can choose odd or even, and Lava Brink Venturer has protection from the converted mana cost. They obviously chose odd, and so my entire deck, they have protection from. You know, I was thinking, these Companions have to be some of the best limited cards we've ever seen. So I thought what we do is we call my friend Mike Sigrist, that's right, former Player of the Year Mike Sigrist, and we'd ask him how these rank in the big picture for limited of all time, because he's been drafting since the very beginning. Siggy.
Hey, how's it going, buddy?
What's up, man? How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. I'm talking with my friends here on Outside Notes. I gotta ask you, these Companion cards have just added this crazy layer to Limited that we've never really seen before. How do they fit into some of the most powerful cards ever for Limited?
Well, they're super unique. It's hard to evaluate them against cards like Jit or Pack Rat or something like that, just because you're just starting with 8 cards in your hand, and a lot of these are incredibly powerful cards too. So they're pretty close. Let's put it that way. They're up there. They're right at that bar. Obviously, I think the win percentage of games you cast Jit is probably higher than your win percentage would be if you have a Companion, but you have to draw the Jit. I found them kind of, like you said, I haven't found it that punishing to kind of just take one and go for it. The only one that I don't like to go for is Karuga. I think that one is just too punishing to have your deck be that clunky, where you're all 3+ mana cards, because you can almost never double spell. So once you fall behind, it's really easy to stay behind.
I remember seeing Gyruda and Obosh, so the even and the odd restrictions, and thinking to myself, particularly with the odd, that it would be very difficult. 1-drops oftentimes aren't a priority in Limited, and 2-drops are, and it makes me skip to 3, so kind of doing a Karuga impression. That has not been how it's played out for me with Obosh, though. I found it not that hard to do and incredibly rewarding for doing so.
Yeah, Whisper Squad is your best friend.
Yeah,
I haven't found that one to be that hard to get there on either, or that punishing, again, once you start with it. I've actually had bad experiences with Gyruda, but I think it was just variance. It still seems just, again, that's one that you can kind of fall behind with it because you're only casting cards on 2 or 4, and that's one that I like to do the cycling with, the 1 mana cycling cards. Because you're usually only spending even amounts of mana. You can have a lot of the 1 mana cycling cards and use your odd mana, your 1 extra mana every turn to cycle them.
Oh, that makes sense. Oh, that's a good tip. Yeah, so that way you're always kind of being mana efficient and keeping your hand going. I had a bad experience with Gyruda also. I decked myself.
Okay, I haven't gone there. So it's always fun for me when I have Companion and they have a Companion, so it's kind of like fair, It's not just me starting with 8 cards.
Do you like this dynamic of balancing out this overarchingly really powerful thing of having not only a card, but a good card available to you at all times, but with this cost of having to, make your deck worse overall, at least in some way? Like, does that interest you?
I don't want to have to play a tournament for thousands of dollars with them necessarily, or hundreds of thousands of dollars these days. But I love them for just drafting and all. I know people, one of the complaints about Companions is they create the same kind of game over and over again because you cast the same card. I think in Limited it does the opposite. It allows you to have different, different draft decks. You and I draft the same set hundreds of times.
Yeah.
And a lot of our decks end up looking remarkably similar, especially towards the end when we kind of have an understanding what the cards are. When you have a Companion, your deck's going to look different a lot. It gives you a lot of opportunity for replayability within these Limited formats. So I like the Companions for Limited, for fun or whatever. The fact that I think they just boost your win percentage a little bit too much. So I'd like to see them maybe scale down in power level a little bit. But I think it's fun. There's two of them that I think you can just kind of drop things for. You'll just end up cutting a couple cards, Jengatha and Lutri.
Yeah.
You can be like, oh, well, I had two of this removal spell, but obviously it's clearly much better to just have, this free creature that copies my removal spell anyways. Or in Jengatha, I've had Jengatha a bunch of times. I swear it's always the shark, Voracious Great Shark. I always have a Voracious Great Shark, and then I open Jengatha in some blue-red deck, and I'm like, all right, well, I just have to pitch the shark because now I get a free 5/5.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot, but a little later in the video, I convinced our friends at Wizards of the Coast to give me just a little bit of information from people playing online to see which of these companions actually perform the best. Now, they wouldn't give me the numbers. They trust me, but not quite enough. But I do have them in ranked, like in tiers, basically. So what do you think would be the top one or two of the companions for Limited?
Are we talking about win percentage as a companion or win percentage in general?
Win companioned.
Oh, okay. Zerda is probably the top one because it just goes in the best deck, the cycling deck. Second, Jengatha's got to be low on that list because it's just a 5/5. And if you're drafting around it, maybe Lurrus. I haven't had Lurrus, so it's really tough, but I would guess Lurrus.
Okay. I'll lock in your vote, and when I get to that part of the video, we'll see if you were right. Okay, Mike, thanks so much for coming on. It was great to talk to you.
All right, thank you for having me.
All right, great stuff from Mike Sigrist, and check this out. So we do have some data from Wizards of the Coast directly. This is from players playing on Arena. Let's see the list of cards on how often they were companions. So if these were in a deck, this is So if they were in your pool of cards, this is how often they were actually your companion. So first one is Lutri the Spell Chaser. This makes sense, right? Lutri has probably the easiest one for Limited. It just requires that all your cards have different names. Next on the list is Jegantha the Wellspring, which is the card that Mike kept talking about, although he called it Jenga or something. At any rate, this is the one that requires that you can't have double mana symbols, and that's a pretty easy one to get in your deck. So you can see why it's so high on the list. Next is Karuga. That's all I can think of whenever I read that. You know those old car horn? Anyway, next is Karuga, and Karuga the Macro Sage, which is fundamentally easy to get into your deck. All your cards have to have converted mana costs of 3 or higher. Then we've got Obosh. Ooh, wait a second. Oh, that's better. And then we've got Obosh, the Prey Piercer, and this is similar to Gyruda, but it's odds instead of evens. This one tends to play out better in my experience, though can still be tricky to make that odd, especially if you don't open Obosh in your first pack. Now we get to the really juicy stuff, though. The real question is, how often does the payoff get there? And as we can see, we have these into 3 groups relative to each other. In the A grade group is Lurrus and Gyruda. These are actually the 2 with the highest win percentages when companioned compared with the other companions.
I would guess Lurrus.
Lurrus is interesting in that only costing 3 mana means that you're going to be able to cast Lurrus effectively every single game that you play. Sometimes it's correct to wait a little longer to cast Lurrus so that you can get some immediate value off of it. Now, the interesting part is in contrast to that is Gyruda, who actually costs 6 mana, but is a bomb, like is a legitimate, most of the time 2-for-1 bomb in Limited. The next tier are the Bs. Make no mistake here, all of these are good. They all add to your win percentage. But the Bs are Umori, Obosh, Zerda, Jegantha, and Kahira. And these ones are the ones that are kind of in that sweet spot where they're powerful effects when built around. This is a group that you basically always want to go for the companion if you have the opportunity to do so. In the C+ group, we have Karuga, Yorion, and Lutri. And this one's really interesting because Karuga has a very difficult deck building restriction, as we talked about with Mike, and Yorion does as well. Both of them make your Limited deck a lot worse, so they have a lot more to overcome when you cast them. But Lutri really stands out. I thought for sure that Lutri would be in the B or maybe even in the A category because it's so easy to cast, almost always gives you value, and is the easiest of all the companions to fit into your deck as a companion. So that's it for Companions. Companions are some of the best limited cards we've ever seen. And if you take any lessons from this episode, it's if you open one, try to make it your companion. It's almost always worth it if you can do it. Now, it wouldn't be Outside Notes with a few little highlights. A few highlights. Let's get into some highlights. This one is from our guest, Mike Sigrist, and this one's insane. So as we come in to see what Mike's got going on, he's got an Everquill Phoenix on the battlefield, and he also has the token from it, but he also has an Everquill Phoenix in his hand, and he's trying to get his opponent dead here. So he uses Facet Reader to loot away an Everquill Phoenix, then pays the feather cost and gets it back onto the battlefield with haste. How sweet is that?
All right, so we win.
Next, we have an absolute heartbreaker. This is absurd. And of course, it's all around our good friend, Zenith Flare. This is actually Mike's opponent that we saw as well. So, just to be clear here, 33 life, Zenith Flare for 16. We're not even dead to another Zenith Flare at this point, right? We're good.
Yeah. It's fine. Oh, no! Oh, my God. I can't do this. Oh, my goodness.
They had Lutri to copy it. 16, 32, 48 damage in that one turn just off of Zenith Flares. That's how you do it. And one more highlight before we go, and this is more heartbreak from our friend Deathsea.
It's also an annoying one. I kind of just want to flash in the Deadeye. Next turn, I can boon an Otter, right? I'm just going to flash this in.
So Deathsea decides to flash in a Lurking Deadeye on end step, but the Lordrakis on the battlefield had actually taken damage and was the only creature on the battlefield. Oh, I'll just let you watch.
2 flares incoming. No, I forgot! I forgot!
We've all been there before, Deathsea. Don't worry about it. I know exactly how you feel. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Outside Notes. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Outside Notes. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for updates whenever new content goes live. And if you want to send in your awesome clips that you see out there, use the hashtag Outside Notes and we can use it for discussion about the things we talk about on the show every week. We'll see you next time.